Hi, this is Scott Silverman on behalf of the Florida Atlantic Chapter of the NCGR, which stands for National Council for Geocosmic Research. And I'm here and I'm going to talk a little while with Georgia Stathis, who will be giving a workshop for our local NCGR chapter, from which many people will be attending online as it's a hybrid event from all over the world. The topic of her workshop is badass delineation. And when a nuts and bolts astrologer like Georgia starts talking about badass delineation, you know you want to be there. It means she's turned a corner. All right. The workshop itself will be January 20th, I believe. Is that right, Georgia?
Yes, that is.
Okay. Doors open online or at the brick and mortar location at 10 a.m. And the workshop, if all goes according as planned, will begin at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. And you can just go to astrology, go to the website for the Florida Atlantic Chapter of the NCGR for more details if you want to figure out how to sign up. So, Georgia, I haven't seen you for a while. It's wonderful to see you. You look great. Shall we just dive right in with some questions for the folks out there in cyberspace?
Okay.
All right. How long have you been doing astrology for, Georgia? Astonish me.
Almost 50 years.
Wow. Are you going to do
Yeah.
anything for your 50th anniversary? Do you know when your 50th anniversary is?
It was April 15th, actually.
It just was?
April 15th was the anniversary of my when I decided I had been doing it, but when I decided to not work for other people and just walked out of a job.
Amazing.
I was young and dumb, you know.
Oh, you thought, oh, I can make a really great living by astrology alone.
Yeah, this is way back in the 70s, you know, when you didn't really think about those things.
Exactly.
You
How did
know,
you get into astrology in the first place, Georgia? I really don't know.
it wasn't a plan. I think I was interested when I was little. I think I actually was reading about it when I was about 8 or 9 or 10, because my mother used to give me a quarter to do all the housework. And then I'd go down to the corner drugstore and see these little books for birthdays. They were the Dell books, the little Dell books,
Yep.
but I didn't know it was astrology. I just knew it was birthday books, and I bought them for the people's birthdays. And then when I was studying Greek after American school, we did mythology. But then what happened in my early 20s, I was in San Francisco working at a PR firm. And there was this wonderful, I mean, it was, you know, I believe in things being meant to be. There was this wonderful Irish, she was very Irish from Ireland, beautiful redheaded woman that came as a temp. And she was sitting next to me, and she opened this book up on her breaks that was a Joan Quigley book, Astrology for Adults.
I know that book.
Yes. And I saw the symbols. I was early 20s. And I asked her, I said, oh, I think I remember reading something like that when I was a little girl. I didn't know what it was. And she said, oh, this is wonderful stuff. And she gives me the book to take home. And it was a big, thick book too, I remember. And I read it, and she was only there 3 days, which was very weird.
She
And
played her role, her cosmic role.
Yeah, it was really weird. And I gave her the book back, and I was married at the time. And my then husband said, oh, that's interesting, because I'm having these people called astrologers on my radio show. And so I listened to that, and I just I'd read that book in 3 days, and I decided I wanted to know what this stuff was. And that's how it started.
San Francisco when this happened?
Yes, I was in San Francisco.
Joan Quigley was based in San Francisco, I believe, right?
Yes, she was.
And go meet her or have a reading with
her? Yes, I actually did meet Joan Quigley. She was speaking at an NCGR regional way after the Reagans. And she was quite lovely, actually, because my son had some very serious health problems when he was little. And after that meeting, I went up to her. I was young. Well, I had been doing it a few years. And I said, look, you know, my son's chart is very similar to this chart you're showing here, and I'm worried about his health. And I still have a note. She actually wrote me a personal note after looking at my son's chart. I still have that note in her book saying, they're very similar, the charts, but your son, and she went through the list of why my son was very different. She was
Why it would work out better for your son.
yes, yeah, for his health issues. And I actually still have that note in one of her books in our library.
I would love to see that note. I've heard she was quite gracious, actually.
She was very gracious, and she was a really good astrologer.
I know. I'm sorry there was more of her material did not survive.
Yeah.
So I mean, of course, I read What Does Joan Say, right?
Right,
Which every astrologer should read, but she really didn't go into into the details of her techniques, and her techniques were awesome. Hence, the Reagan administration. I think Lee Lehman may have spent some time with her. And
probably, if I know Lee, I suspect she did.
So we should actually spread the net a little bit and see if anyone has any of her materials. Anyone knows any of Joan Quigley's secrets, right?
Yeah, she was very precise, and I remember she wouldn't reveal, the Reagan's data, but she did show how she would measure a time looking at the house cusps and how they changed. That's the one thing I remember from the lecture, but this is so many years ago, But she was gracious. She was, and I was very lucky because I met a lot of these people coming up, the people, a lot of them are gone now, but I did meet Dane Rudyard. Yes, I did meet Dane.
I know Demetra has told me her meeting with Dane Rudyard, but what was it like for you? Did you get a chance to talk to him?
No, not really. I mean, he was somewhat abrupt. And I was terrified. I remember Barbara Waters, who was a character I think it was a UAC, or I'm not sure what it was. And she had this huge room. She was a very good
astrologer looks at murder, Barbara Waters. Right?
Yes, yeah. Waters. And actually Roxana Muse, who was a good friend of mine who just passed away last year, sent me Barbara Waters' calculations with the stock markets, the handwritten stuff that we put into the AIP library. So, I've got all this stuff from all these years of meeting people that I was a young girl. I mean, I was a young girl and I was enamored.
So you made that half century matter. What about Roxana's papers? Were they donated to anyone?
I don't know where
she was such a good astrologer. Yeah.
She was, and a good lady too.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know where her stuff went. I mean, the problem is finding people's items, when they're gone, because families will lots of times just dump them, because there's a lot of papers. So anyway, this
brings me back now. When you're getting into astrology, since you said the F word, family, the other F word, how did your family respond to your deciding to study astrology and take it seriously? Did they roll their eyes? Was it a scandal?
Oh, yeah. Well, it wasn't a scandal. I mean, the good news is they lived in Chicago and I lived in California. But, I was a first generation Greek woman. And they didn't like it. My mother, I have to say, she was okay with whatever I wanted to do. She was very supportive of the arts that I studied. My father wanted me to be an attorney. He was an investor, and I had a hard time with my father doing this many, many years. But, the good news is in the last 10 years of his life, he came around. And he lived.
How could he not? You're at the top of the field.
Yeah, he came around and we became very good friends at the end. And actually, I ended up running his businesses after he passed away. So
he got his way. He
got his way. He got his way. But the thing is, this is very interesting because I didn't want to give the astrology up, but I did like business, but I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I kept telling myself, is there a way to do both? Can I do both? Can I cross over somehow?
You are one of the acknowledged business astrologers.
And that's how I rectified it.
The only thing that would be better, did you build the family business using astrology when you took it over? Were you able to benefit the family company through your astrological knowledge?
Well, the family company was pretty well established when I took over 12 years ago. I mean, I was working with him for the last 25 years. It was definitely a Jupiter cycle. But what was interesting about that is because I found the incorporation dates of these companies he started, and they're accurate. And we've done some really great stuff with those charts. So, I don't know if you do things with the charts or you see the opportunity coming, and being a Pisces, I envision an opportunity and it shows up.
You know, it's nice when a chart works for you, whichever it
Mm-hmm.
is. When
Mm-hmm.
it seems to be a chart that's accurate and works, we
Yeah. Amazing stuff.
should be a little bit of both, perhaps. And
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of both.
now, this workshop you're giving on the 20th, I understand a lot of it's going to be about how you first approach a chart when you
Yeah,
start working with it. I wonder if you could just tell me
sure.
a few of the things you look at. Of course, I'm from a generation where when I think of that, I don't know whether it's Mark Edmund Jones or Al H. Morrison, but I remember being taught the hardest aspect in the chart, like between a personal planet and a slow moving planet, is both very important and a vocational indicator. Have you found this to be true?
Yeah, I think that that's one of the many things that those characters taught us, you know. What I like to do is I actually, and I'll show the system, you know, because the way I have done this before this lecture, it's been an hour and a half lecture, but this is going to be an all day. And basically what I like to do before I sit down is I want to work an hour before the person comes in. And I don't do it the hour before they show up. I actually prepare 2 or 3 days before and sleep on it. And I'll go through some real, I want to have the structure. I want to have the patterns of the chart. I want to have the age cycle the person is in. I want to know where Saturn is going. I want to
The
know where
age
Jupiter is.
cycle, did you say?
Yeah, the person's age cycle.
Is that the Huber system or what is, or
No, it's just, you know, I have a grid that I'm going to be giving them about, you know, like during a, if they're in a Saturn return, what else is going on that's like the 45th year is a Saturn opposition
the
generally,
stage
but
of
it's
life?
all,
I see, right. The
it's a
age
stage of
cycle, yeah.
life. And it's a grid we're going to be using. And I look at the age, I look at the number for the year, I look at where the eclipses are moving. I look at all that stuff and I lay it in, I write it all by hand onto the chart because I'm visual. And then well, I'll show them how to do it, but then that gives me enough information. So when I sit down to talk with them on Zoom, I already have this basic, it's like putting the bricks down before I work with them.
Exactly.
You know, I don't like to just go, I don't like going into a chart cold.
I don't
I
either.
hate that. I can't do that because I'm slow. I mean, I'm not slow.
Well,
I'm just I'm a slow, it takes me a while to kind of incubate. That's why I have to have all these little pieces down before I decide to work with the person. So, and what I also do, and I've learned this in the last few years, which I didn't do before because I was young and dumb, I ask them 3 very short and sweet things that are their concerns. Because I didn't used to do that because, you know, it used to be, well, you know, prove it to me and you want
right.
to
I
show that
should
you
be
know
able
what you're
to figure
doing.
it out if I'm a good
Yeah.
astrologer. I know. Yes.
But you know, you're going to be an hour on the phone with these people of Zoom or an hour and a half, and you want to get right to the meat because people, I mean, there's a lot of people that want to know about their spiritual journey, and I believe in all of that. But the truth is, I work with the public a lot, and they want to know what's happening in their life. You know, what's happening with my job? Why am I having problems emotionally? They want to know this stuff. And so if I don't have those things calculated before they come in and incubated, I don't get the picture for them. I can't get it. I have to see pictures. And that's why I do see a lot of pictures when I work. That's weird to
By
say.
pictures, you mean like just mental images?
Like things will come to me. Like if I see, you know, certain configurations working together, there will be an idea that comes in and I'll always share that with them. And then lots of times people will say, oh yeah, I've been thinking about doing thus and such. Because I think I'm pretty intuitive. At least that's what I've been told.
All that Pisces, right?
Yeah, I have a lot of Pisces. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, if you've been doing it long enough,
You
you
know,
know, and
it's not just when you're doing it long enough, it's not just you recognize the patterns begin to recognize you, right?
yeah, yeah.
Really a
And
give
you
and
just,
take. Yeah.
yeah. And you see the same kinds of people coming because, you know, I have a good friend, a dear friend who's an astrologer up in Mendocino, in California, when I live in California. And she always got the really easy clients, but she has Jupiter on the ascendant. She always gets these wonderful clients that are just great, you know. And I get all the hard clients, the Saturn people, because I have a lot of heavy Saturn in my chart. And I've seen that over the years, you know, you get the kinds of people that kind of reflect who you are. And
I agree.
and if you're going through like your own age cycle changes, you'll kind of get those people too. And it's almost like you're teaching, but you're also learning at the same time.
You know, I know it's strange. I have a Pisces moon, and I
Yeah,
swear
you,
I get so many Pisces moon clients. I
yep.
don't know what it's about, but they find me. If you were going to think if there was one funny or memorable reaction of a family member to your deciding to devote your life to astrology, does anything come to
One,
mind?
of a family member reacting to what I was doing.
Yeah,
I don't know.
know.
I
I know.
guess they got used to me. They got
I
used to me.
they got used to. I know. I've been at cocktail parties, and I tell some says, "What do you do?" And I'm an astrologer, and they say, "Oh, I didn't know one could do that for a living." And I realize as we keep talking, is they meant astronomy. They thought I was an
That's,
astronomer,
yeah,
and they
that
go, "Oh,
happens a
I didn't
lot.
know you
Yeah.
could do astronomy for a living." And then I go,
Yeah.
"Phew, sidestep that one, dodge that bullet, right?" And,
That's true. They think you're an astronomer. A lot of people think you're an
uh,
yeah, that's true. That's
and I
true.
always laugh. I know if I'm in a tough room and I'm
Mhm.
not comfortable telling people I do astrology, I'll tell them I'm a life coach, right? And
Yeah, I used to
which
call
gets
myself a
ridiculed, but that that's my backup plan, right?
yeah, I used to call myself a cycles analyst. That always sounded pretty
Cycles
good.
analyst, that is great. And of course, half the people you say that to think you have a speech impediment, and they thought you were a psychoanalyst, right? Yeah, that's beautiful.
Maybe that's it. I
So
don't know.
now
It's
let
just
me
I don't care anymore, you know.
exactly. You know, you just want to do your work, help people, and enjoy life. Now, let's talk a little bit about so people don't have to prepare for your workshop in any way. They don't have to bring anything but themselves and maybe a notebook.
Yeah, notebooks are good. I like to write notes. I mean, some people like to type things in, but I learn better when I write notes.
Should they bring
So
their
they could,
chart with them? Or
well, you know, it might, if they want to bring their chart, it might help because there might be some things that I'm doing that day that they've not done. And then they can look them up on their own charts. You know, that's how we learn, right?
exactly. I I'd like to, if we could, go into some of the upcoming celestial configurations that we're all going to be slogging our way through or embracing, depending upon how they hit our charts. So let's start with the upcoming Jupiter trine Uranus in
You,
April.
you mean Jupiter conjunct Uranus at 20, almost
I'm sorry.
22,
Yes,
almost 22
Jupiter
Taurus,
conjunct Uranus. Why did I put a triangle there? I
because
don't.
you want it to be a trine.
There you go. No, you know what? I think it's because I was thinking about um, the Pluto Neptune Uranus configuration that's
Yeah,
happening later in the year. Okay. So tell me about how should one approach a Jupiter conjunct Uranus
Uranus.
new cycle? Because this is the beginning of a new synodic cycle, isn't it?
Right, it is. It is. And we're actually only in the last, what, if this is an interview in January, it's going to happen in April. We're in the last 4 months of 13, approximately 13 plus years.
Could you explain to newcomers what
Oh,
a
yeah.
synodic cycle is?
Oh, yeah. That's when two planets come together and make a conjunction that are always on different orbits. This is the simplest way to explain it. And they all do it differently. I wrote a book about this a couple
Pushing
years
through
ago. It
time,
came
a
out.
wonderful
Pushing
book.
Through Time.
Yes.
Pushing Through Time, that you helped me with, actually. And it's like a clock. That's the best way to describe it. When the two planets come together, Jupiter and Uranus is pretty frequent. It's about every 13 or so years. But there's a lot slower ones, you know, like the Saturn Uranus conjunction, which is about every I think that's 45 years. And so every time the more frequent ones happen with Jupiter, it is really neat if you've lived long enough to go back in your life and see what happened the last time it conjoined in a different part of your chart. And the last time Jupiter Uranus conjoined was at 0 degrees of Aries.
Right on the Aries axis. Wow.
On the Aries axis, right. And that's, which is very interesting because I just did a workshop on this and I noticed that a lot of the violence that we've seen, a lot of the assault weapons, a lot of the issues with the school shootings. I actually did a workshop a couple of months ago for Connecticut, and this Jupiter Uranus at 0 Aries was pretty lit up when those things were happening. Okay. So we're finishing that cycle right now. We're moving into the Jupiter Uranus at 21-22 Taurus at the end of April of 2024. And what I've found in my research, the more positive side of this is that Uranus has to do with waking to one's soul's purpose. It's out of the box thinking, it's innovation. And it is classically, I feel, an innovation cycle. And so what I like to look at, and I'll be talking about this in the workshop on that Saturday that I'm doing this, is look at the houses, you know, if you want to do the tracking. I mean, the time before the last one, which was at 0 Aries, was at 5, I think, in Aquarius, I think early degrees, like 5 degrees. So always look to see the houses that Jupiter rules in your chart, and always look at the houses that Uranus rules in your chart, because wherever the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is taking place is where you may see new ideas and new innovations, but you have to incorporate the houses that those planets rule to give a much fuller picture, a much more three-dimensional view. But we have 4 months to go before the old cycle is done. And so this is the balsamic phase of the cycle, which is the dying on the vine phase of the cycle.
The dark of the moon cycle, yeah.
The dark of the moon cycle, like balsamic vinegar, which I always like to say, the best vinegar in the world, takes a while to ferment. So there's a lot of, what I noticed in my research in the book was there's a lot of fermentation that takes place during the balsamic phase. There's a lot of unrest and uneasiness as well, because Uranus is not exactly an easy planet.
And
but
don't
you know,
ferment things in the dark. If you're fermenting something, aren't you putting it out of the light in a
yeah, you withdraw,
right?
withdraw and you ferment it. So a lot of people are in withdrawal mode right now as well in this fermentation cycle. And the thing that I do want to say, I'd like to say this about Uranus, because every time we talk about Uranus in astrological circles, more frequently, we will hear the word chaos, volatility, revolution, earthquakes, you know, anything that's catastrophic that goes with Uranus.
Hive mind, right? Some people say hive mind, right?
Right, exactly.
Right.
Right. But the thing about Uranus, it doesn't necessarily play out in a disastrous way if we're willing to let go of things, if we're willing to be open to change, if we're willing to
accept change,
to accept change without fighting the change. Because if you try to restrict Uranus energy, it'll just blow up in your face. And so I always tell people that's when the magic comes in. When you say, okay, I'm in a change mode. I'm a little chaotic right now. I'm not sleeping. There's been a lot of issues with people, you know, with sleep. And that means that I need to pay attention to why I have all this anxiety. Uranus is an anxious energy planet. And the reason the anxiety is there is because there's something we're not addressing. There's something that we know we need to do to change, but we refuse. The good news about Jupiter is that it does guide us if we take a moment to listen. And I do think with the Jupiter Uranus being in late degrees of Taurus, in a wide sextile to Neptune, in a very wide sextile to Neptune, that there are moments, if we take time away from the chaos that we're in right now and turn off the media, folks, by the way, turn off all the media, because Jupiter Uranus is overkill on the media. I mean, just overkill. If you can just turn it off for a few hours a day, you'll do a lot better than leaving it on 24/7. It doesn't help the Jupiter Uranus energy. So anyway, it is very innovative. And if you go back in your life and you go and see where was Jupiter Uranus at 0 Aries in my chart, what happened during that almost 14 years of my life? What happened 14 years before that when Jupiter Uranus was, I think I'm just remembering this off the top of my head, I think it was 5 Aquarius. What happened in your life if you're old enough to have gone through this? And you will see that there is a repeating pattern of change.
Exactly. I've begun lately thinking of the horoscopic circle as a spiral rather than a circle. And spirals, as they go in, they double back, right? And I'm doing some interesting work with this. I'll keep you posted.
Good.
Let me ask you, the thing that popped into my mind, it's so interesting as you're talking about you have to be willing to embrace change or let it in and not resist it. Doesn't that, in a way, kind of address the dual rulership of Aquarius, right?
I think that's definitely
about allowing change, but Saturn is about resisting change. And Do you ever use Saturn as the ruler of Aquarius as well, or do you mostly use Uranus as the ruler? It seems to me you use both.
I do. I actually do use both, although I'm a modern astrologer. I'm not, and I use the Koch system, by the way. I don't use the whole sign
Why
system.
do you use the Koch system? Just very briefly.
Okay, briefly, the reason I use that is because I've tried other systems, and I found that the cusps on the Koch system seem to work really well with number one transits to them. And they also seem to work very well in terms of progressions or solar arcs.
You mean the cadent and intermediate succeedent cusp?
Yeah,
okay.
it seems that it works better for my kind of work. I don't know why. I mean, I think Placidus has more to do with the psychological makeup of a person.
You do
and I think
work. I've heard that Koch, for some people, they find that when a planet
it's
crosses
accurate.
the Koch house cusp,
it's just like that.
Yes. Do you
Yes.
remember how long ago was that campaign? Things go better with Koch. Was that a long time ago? Right? I know Debbie.
I think that was a long time ago.
Debbie Kempton Smith, who wrote the first astrology book I ever read.
She was great. She was a character.
Stargazer's Notebook. That's what she used Koch, and she'd say things go better with Koch.
Better with Koch. They do. I think they go better, but I'm not saying that anybody should use the Koch system. Everybody's got opinions about the house systems now. An argument I won't even go to. Okay. Right. But and whatever house system you use, try this Jupiter Uranus idea, and see how that fits into your own chart.
I think that sounds great. I've heard that Neptune is coming to the end of its long road, and it's going to be stationing in the 29th degree of Pisces. And perhaps, did you say 29 degrees and 55 minutes?
That's 29 degrees, 55 minutes.
Talk about turning back at the 11th hour. Could you talk to me a little bit about what that means to you in your work, or what you think it may mean on a collective level?
Well, that's happening on July 2nd, if anybody wants the date. Well, I think anytime because right now, as we're doing this interview, Pluto's at 29 Capricorn. Actually, the day that I'm giving the lecture on January 20th, Pluto is in fact, I think it's that day that I'm giving the lecture. This is going to be interesting.
That it crosses over to Aquarius?
It crosses over, yeah, at 7:50 at night. It goes into Aquarius, so who knows? Will we even be there? Anyway.
Perfect for a hybrid workshop, right?
It's perfect, yeah, we hope it works. Yeah, I think, especially with these outer planets, Pluto, forever, it takes forever to move. Neptune takes forever to move. Uranus in a couple of years is going to go into Gemini. Whenever you have one of these slower planets at the very tail end, what we call the anaretic degree, which the Garretts used, right? The 29th degree.
Which is really the 30th degree, right? Just so no one's
confused. Really, it's the 30th, yeah. Whenever you have them at the anaretic degree, which the Garretts used to say, it's the tail that wags the dog. That's how they explained.
Who used to say it? I'm sorry.
Helen Garrett was an astrologer way back.
She was in Arizona.
Yes, she and her husband.
Yeah.
And they did a workshop. I remember this workshop. It was way back when, and they were talking about the 29th degree, and they're saying, think about a really fluffy puppy and how it starts out all happy and frisky and clean, and it's deciding to go on a journey. And it's going through these fields, and it's going through the swamp and the mud, and it's going through this and it's going that. And finally, it comes out of all of this. It's near the end of that journey, and the tail has become so heavily laden with mud and stuff that the tail is wagging the dog. And I remember that story. It was such a great image for me, because it is kind of like the attempt to throw off the last, Neptune is a 14-year cycle, the attempt to throw off the last 14 years of what didn't work, wherever that has been traveling through your horoscope and whatever house that it rules in your chart. And I do remember Diana Rosenberg, who wrote that book on fixed stars. Yeah, because, the 29th degree is considered to be a very difficult degree. It's called Scheat, Scheat, which many astrologers call something else, which is not exactly the kindest, most friendly.
Scheat is going to be the 29th degree of what sign?
Pisces.
Pisces. Oh, it's going to be there with
Scheat. Yes, Neptune will be on Scheat the next 2 years, basically. until spring of next year.
What
And
does
then we'll
that
go back.
portend? You have to refresh my memory because I can't remember the delineation of Shiat.
Right. Well,
alone.
Diana Rosenberg told me, and I felt that this was absolutely accurate. She told me, I asked her about this, and she said that Shiat is in the constellation of Pegasus. And Pegasus flies above the chained woman, Andromeda,
Yep.
who's about to be eaten by the sea monster Cetus,
Yep.
and eventually is rescued. And she said that the 29th degree Shiat is the release from bondage
Of the chained woman.
of the chained woman. It represents the release from bondage. And so if we look at Neptune in its own sign, Pisces, at the 29th degree, which is Shiat, which is the end of the zodiac,
Yep.
a lot of people, a lot of things will be released from bondage. In other words, those things that we had 14 or 15 years ago as Neptune was going into Pisces that have kept us from being our soul, meeting our soul purposes, perhaps, those will come to an end. Absolutely come to an end. Yeah, and the other thing too about the 20, anything in Pisces, but Neptune, the way I look at Neptune, it can often represent dismemberment of the soul also. The dismemberment of whatever exists, the separation. And the best way I think to look at Neptune is to think about, especially at the 29th degree throughout this next year, is to become less attached to outcomes. And if you think about, this is the image I always use with my own clients, because I think you can't tell them, these technical terms because they don't get the technical terms. I always say to them, look, think about, you're this beautiful shore and there's a boat. And the sun is coming down and you think, gee, this is nice. I'm going to get in the boat and I'm going to sit there and watch the sun come down. But the waves are kind of lulling you to sleep and you fall asleep. And you wake up a little bit later and you find yourself in the middle of this big, huge body of water with no shore in place, no shore in sight. Now, there's a couple of things you can do. You can either scream and holler or jump in the water and try to swim to shore. You'll probably die. Or you can just let that boat take you with the current to a distant shore.
Go with the flow.
Going with the flow, yeah. And I think that this is what we have to do to be released from whatever bondage we keep encasing ourselves in the course of this next year and a half with Neptune at 29 degrees. And we will be released from bondage. I mean, frankly, people will die. People will pass away. Things will happen that will change our lives. We'll decide to leave our homes. We'll decide to move. We'll decide to change families. This is whatever the bondage has been. And, there's bondage. What is bondage? It's and it's Pisces. It's a Neptune in Pisces in its own sign. It's realizing that there's only so much you can do to help other people. And at some point, you have to let them stand on their own 2 feet and say no. And that's what the lesson of Saturn coming up to Neptune in the spring of 2025 will be about, is about setting boundaries with boundlessness.
What was that aspect again? I'm sorry.
It'll be a Saturn-Neptune conjunction.
Yes.
Coming up in the spring of 2025, which means we're also in this next year, 2024, in the balsamic phase of that cycle, which was about 35 or 36 years ago it started. And so this next year is about really looking at, especially, and I think Saturn is really helping this, looking at, what we really can do in our lives and what we really can't do, or frankly, what we no longer want to do. But then when you've decided that you're going to let yourself go with something or release something or not do it anymore, to be very, very careful that you do not allow something else to come in to the space that's the same thing you just released yourself from.
And what occurs to me as you're talking is a refusal of martyrdom in some
That's
way.
what I'm saying. Thank you for saying it in exactly a very succinct way. The refusal of martyrdom. And I'm not saying we can't help people. I help people all the time.
Which is part of the liberation process. Yes.
That's part of the release from bondage, which also, if you want to look at a more spiritual context, and I don't know if we've really died. Okay. I think we have come back. I mean, I'm not into thinking I was a famous person in a past life. I don't know any about that. But I do think that it's karmically true, because if you can't set a boundary that's healthy for other people, you're not doing them any service either. And you'll just have to come back and do it over again, as will they. And so, yes, setting clear boundaries, even though it sometimes is very painful to watch, And I do think that that's part of this Neptune at 29 degrees Pisces, 55 minutes, July 2nd, 2024.
Which reminds me, I did mean to ask you about when we were talking about the Jupiter Uranus. Do you ever look at the Sabian symbols
I do.
when planets come together in a conjunction, particularly at the
I
start of
do.
a new synodic cycle? And
Yeah.
how does your understanding or your investigation of the meaning of the Sabian symbol affect, if at all, your analysis of the new cycle?
Well, I don't do it all the time. It's just when something says inside of me, you need to look this up. That's when I do it. And then it seems to fit exactly perfectly. I mean, I don't do it all the time. It's one of those things that you do, when you're in a session with somebody and you've done all this, done the secondaries, the solar arcs, the transits, this, that, and there's always going to be a point in the session where there's something that you aren't quite getting. And this is one of those moments you do something like that. You look up the Sabian symbol, or you, look at a number, or you add the numbers up. You look at the decanate that it's happening in, because I do look at the decanates. I mean, Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces is going to be at Scorpio's decanate.
So you look at the sign of the decanate rather than the planetary ruler of the sign of the decanate?
I look at the decanates a lot with these degrees, especially when they're at 29 degrees. Like Pluto right now is transiting at 29 degrees of Capricorn, right? Which is the Virgo section. And that's how I look at the ascendants. When I look at an ascendant, that's why I don't like whole sign. That's one of the other reasons. Because if I look at a whole sign like an ascendant that's a late degree something, say it's a late degree Libra, say it's a 28 degrees Libra, that's really going to be in Gemini. That's the Gemini section of Libra. So I'm going to look not only at the 5 degree
rule, right? Yeah.
Right, the 5 degree. I'm going to look at Venus, which rules Libra, but I'm also going to look where Mercury is in the chart, because that's the decanate ruler. These are the kinds of weird things that I do.
Ruler, the decanates, yes.
Yeah, I always look at the rulerships. When I look at houses, I look at what house is ruled by that. When I look at a transit, I look at where it's happening, and I look at the houses that it rules, because it gives me a 3-dimensional chess, like on Star Trek, I think, a 3-dimensional chess view of what's happening with that person. I know these are weird things, but I do these weird things.
I've been working with this past week, so it's so funny that you mentioned 3-dimensional chess. Let me since those of us, I mean, it's been really truly extraordinary when we remember the last big solar eclipse from August 2017, and that seemed it was the eclipse, if you remember, that sort of divided the USA in half, with the eclipse path going from like sort of northwest to southeast. And it was only after that eclipse that the current polarization that plagues our nation really seemed to get going and to amplify. We have another eclipse on April 8th.
A total eclipse.
It's going to be also sort of dividing the country, but more east to west. And Chiron is going to be so tightly conjoined, the sun and the moon, in that eclipse and eclipse path. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the April eclipse. Have you thought about it?
Do you have anything to
say about what it might mean personally to your workshop attendees, or on a mundane level, how it will affect us all?
Well, the first thing about that eclipse, it's going to be a bundle chart.
A what chart?
A bundle.
Yes.
I'll be talking about patterns in the workshop as well. It's going to be a bundle. I don't see bundles very often. It's not one of the most common things that I've seen, but bundle charts are very focused in only a certain piece of where it falls. The rest is open for discussion. It's very tight. And that chart is actually going to have Mars at 13 Pisces, Saturn at 14 Pisces. So we're going to see a Mars-Saturn conjunction.
Wow.
It's going to be Neptune at 28 Pisces, Venus at 4 Aries, the North Node at 15 Aries, the Moon at, because it'll be 19 Aries total eclipse, Chiron at 19 with the degree of the eclipse, and Mercury at 24 Aries, and the Jupiter Uranus just about to happen in about 2 weeks. So here's how I look at Chiron. First of all, the US is having a Chiron return if you look at the Declaration of Independence chart. Everybody uses different charts, but the US is having a Chiron return like it did in the 60s or early 70s, I think. The way I look at Chiron, I see it as a hybrid planet, comet, where, because it travels between Saturn, which is the old way of thinking, and Uranus, which is the new way of thinking. And I look at Chiron as kind of the bridge, like a hybrid planet that combines, in its most successful expression, it combines traditional things that work, that have structure, that are workable, that are standard, that are anchored, only those that are anchored and structured, with Uranus, which is new ideas. And so here we're seeing this eclipse happening. It's also at 19 degrees of Aries, which is in the 10, 20, it's in the second decanate, which is in the Leo section. I think we could see a lot of wounding of egos during this time, which is, we're due.
4 months from now, not that far off, right?
Yeah, a lot of wounding of egos because, you know, and if, in fact, if egos, whether it's political or personal, if the egos refuse to give up their position, then Chiron bites. But if egos do give up their position, then healing and good positive results can result from that. And the way I look at eclipses, I always look at 90 days after eclipses, because when you're in the darkness of the eclipse, and I do work with eclipses a lot, when you're in the darkness, in the shadow of the eclipse, it's very hard to see what's going on. It's kind of like driving with a blind spot.
Yep.
And then about 90 days later, it's really like 87 days, but it's 90 days later when you see the square, the first quarter, the opening square, which is the management square. The opening square is always the management square to the eclipse. Suddenly you have insights. Now, 90 days after that eclipse, April 8th, I have it in my star cycles cheat sheet here, is July 11th, around July 11th,
Okay.
90 days later. And that's right about the time of the Republican convention.
Oh, interesting. Did you check
Yeah.
90 days before too? Just to
You know, and I do look at 90 days before. 90 days before, if this is April 8th, we're going to go back to March
and that's a Uranian
March.
technique. That's a Uranian technique, yes.
Is it really? Because
Yeah.
I do ask people lots of times with the eclipses, well, what was happening 3 months before this eclipse? And they'll often say, gee, I was thinking about doing thus and such, which we've been discussing. And then 90 days later, you'll see the results. Suddenly you have peripheral vision and you can see what's really going on, which will be very interesting because in July, in this so-called Republican convention, we're going to probably see things that we don't see going on during the eclipse.
It's going to be very interesting.
It's going to be interesting.
You made me look forward to the Republican convention now.
It's in July, and then the other one, the Democrats are in Chicago in August, I think, after the eclipse.
You know, I could talk to you for another hour, but I'm going to have to begin
to
close this chat. But I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about your involvement with the Alexandria iBase project and why these archival matter so much.
To me, to me it matters quite a bit.
To me as well.
Yeah, because Scott, we were at Kepler. I taught Kepler College. I taught the undergrad.
Yep.
And I've been doing this a really long time. And about maybe 20 years ago, I started getting phone calls from families who lost their astrologer parent. saying, we don't know what to do with my mother's or my father's books. Mostly it was mother's.
That they spent their
And
lifetime collecting.
that they spent their lifetime collecting, which will never be published or printed again, which is the way astrology books go. And I spent like quite a few years, about 10 years, sending them all over the world, to the IMSAROGICs when they were starting their school. I sent them to Australia. I sent them all over. And I tried to get the libraries, the publicly funded libraries, to take books, but they wouldn't take them because they didn't have funding, blah, blah, blah. They would take them for Friends of the Library sales, which everything gets sold piecemeal. So at an NCGR conference on the Charles River, I think it was. I don't know.
That's
I think you were at the
talk, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I was sitting in the meeting and I said, look, I'm getting all these books and I give them to the groups and I blah, blah, blah. And I think we should do something about it. And that's when my friend Christine Skinner stood up with me and said, Georgia, let's talk. And so we began this from that time. That had to be before we became a legal 501c3 nonprofit. That was 2015. That had to be, I don't know, 4 or 5 years before that. And Urania Trust, she was on the board. They helped us start. I've been funding a lot of this. We are not, well.
And Alexandria Costas, I believe, is also involved in this project, isn't she?
Alexandria Costas, no.
No? Oh,
I know her really well. I think she might be involved with the library, maybe up in Seattle, the hard copy library. Yeah,
and
because
that's a wonderful organization. I'll just
yes,
that out.
Yes.
I get the name wrong. I've trained myself to say Celestial Arts and Education Library. Is that what you're talking about, Jen?
That's a hard copy library. What we're actually work very well with all the libraries because what we have is librarians full-time, not full-time, they're working about, we give them, I think, 30 hours a month that catalog all the books that we have in different libraries. And it's done with a subject driven. So if you're looking even in your own library, and most of us have pretty big libraries, or if you're looking for a certain book on solar arcs, you can put it in the subject line and everything we've uploaded with the tables of contents, with where they're located, whether you can rent it for free online at Internet Access or archives, you can find the books that way.
Oh, you mean, so we're not going to be downloading the actual books from the Alexandria iBase project, but will allow us to know where to go
to get the books
online at hopefully very little cost?
Oh, either that or to go online to Internet Archives where you can borrow it for an hour for free.
Right. I know there's some sort of legal battle or legal issue with
right. I've talked to them about that already.
It's problematic. I know if you wanted to get some of the original Uranian astrology books, you can't download them, but they are uploaded over at the Internet Archive Project. And some of the Project Hindsight books, I was shocked. I was happy, right?
We've got a pretty conscientious crew with librarians. And so Anna is our head librarian. So we really don't do copyright. We're very careful with copyright.
Of course.
But if you, even with our own library, if you want to find something in your own library, like whatever you want to find it on, I always use it for research. I had a student in Mexico that was doing a research project on serial killers, which was interesting in astrology. And yes.
By the way, check out Glenn Mitchell's work on that if you want to.
Okay.
Eye-opening. Yes.
And she used our database because it's a pretty extensive database. We've got about 20,000 things listed now. We had several fundraising campaigns in the last year. Astrology Hub was very, very supportive, and they ran a big fundraising campaign. We just had another fundraising campaign because we pay our librarians $25 an hour. They're not free.
Right.
And so if somebody, we just got a donation for $250, and that'll give us 10 hours of library time where a librarian can go in and upload whatever needs to be done based on what the plan is. And
great.
so
we could decide, we now know the relationship between our donation and what will get done.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
What about the tapes and the videotapes that are part of our heritage, that these things get thrown out? The cassette tapes, we need to transfer them. We need to digitize all this stuff because a lot of this information is not written down anywhere, right? Astrology was very much in the 70s and 80s an oral history, right?
Right. Right. And a lot. Yeah. And I was part of the tape archive project for ESAR. I was one of the people that worked with Steve Pincus for that. And when he
Yep.
built that up with me. But we do have, Michael Erlewine and I have been in communication for the last 2 years.
I know
Michael's going to,
sending you those hard drives, and I even wrote him and asked him what's happening to the ACT files,
Yeah.
the Astrological Conference on Technique, because this is stuff that can't get lost. But it
Right.
hasn't
Well,
been
Michael-
hard copy published. Right.
Michael is telling me it's going to be ready any day now. So because we have another section at the website called Special Collections. And Special Collections is different than the Opals database, which is the library database where you can find your subjects. Special Collections has right now several Mercury out. I don't know if anybody remembers this. Mercury.
Yes, I have 2/3 of a collection of the Mercury Hour that we had a wonderful astrologer named, I think, Joyce Weinberg, who had
Yes.
this library, and she just donated it to our 2 astrology groups in South Florida. And oh my God, we all walked away with shopping bags full of books.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
And the cornucopia was not exhausted. Yes.
Yes. And so we have scanned several of those editions with the cover page showing what's in that particular issue. So that's where Michael Erlewine's papers are going to go into these Special Collections.
Will we be able to go to the Alexandria iBase website and be able to look up, be able to download the Hellenistic astrology posts, or at least read them?
Well, I don't know what he's giving me data. He's giving me a pretty big terabyte.
What ACT was? ACT was it was a moderated super site with all these different. It was sort of like Skyscript in the UK, Deb Holdings
Okay.
site, where so there was a Hellenistic division, there was meteorology, astrometeorology, and different people would be the moderators of different streams of information. So for a while, Robert Schmidt was in charge of the Hellenistic division on ACT, and this was in honor of Charles Jane, the Astrological Conference on Technique. And there was so much wonderful material that was collected and uploaded, just as if we look at the Uranian archives from a couple of Uranian sites in the 1990s, you know, some of it's out there still, but a lot of it, you know.
Well, we do the best we can, Scott, with what we get and what we can work with and the funding we have. We're doing the best we can. I'm waiting for Michael to send this stuff. It will be available to see on.
He'll send it.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how does one get to actually go and read this stuff or look at it? Does it mean
you should go into the website at www.alexandriaibase.org. ALEXANDRIAIBASE.org.
Now this is
Just
tax
go into
deductible. This is people, if people want to make
Yeah,
charitable donations,
yeah.
they can. It's tax deductible, right?
Yeah, it's a 501c3 nonprofit educational foundation. Yes, yes.
So a
And
worthy cause.
It is a worthy cause, and
So
we're going
all
to
you
keep
people
going.
out there that are wondering, where can you send the money you don't need? Please think of our archival projects in
Think of AIP.
the 21st century. I just want to ask you very briefly, what do you think? What are your thoughts on Pluto ricocheting in and out of Aquarius right now? Do you have anything to share with us?
Well, it already has done it briefly in the spring of last year, briefly. Think about that. Pluto is at the anaretic degree, right? What does Pluto rule in your chart? Where's Scorpio in your chart? It's going to go from Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, to Aquarius, which is ruled by Uranus. You can use Saturn if you want, but I think with the Jupiter Uranus conjunction that there's an opportunity here with Pluto going into Aquarius, because Pluto in Aquarius is disposited by Uranus, and Jupiter Uranus will be in Taurus, right? So where is that happening in your chart? Because there could be it may not be your idea. It could be, like right now, I'm working on an archive project with an engineer who's taking 50 years of work and organizing it in Google Drive for our site and for AIP. Transcripts, recordings, videos, audios.
Sorry, AIP?
AIP is alexandriaibase.org.
Thank you. That's the abbreviation.
We call it AIP. It's just easier, But I'm working with an engineer right now who's taking my own personal work, and it's going to go on our website at starcycles.com. And when I'm dead, which will be sometime in the future, who knows when, but it will happen, that will also go into AIP. But so I'm organizing all my data. And I think with the Pluto going into Aquarius, disposited by Uranus in Taurus, that might not be so bad. It might be that we finally get rid of the riffraff in the country. Who knows?
We're going to find out.
Uranus square Pluto, you know.
I just want to ask you a last question. Since sometimes you use Uranus as the ruler of Aquarius, and sometimes you use Saturn, how do you know which to use and when?
I think it's when a person has a lot of Saturn energy in their chart, it's more Saturn. I find that people have a lot, and I get a lot of those people, a lot of Saturn types. They're not slow. They're not slow. That I don't want to say that people are slow, but they take longer to make a decision. And the thing about those types of people, when you're dealing with Aquarius energy, is it has to get often to the point where it's extremely painful for them to finally let go, instead of other people who are less Saturnian, who are more willing to go, okay, what the hell, you know? And I think it depends on our fear levels, because Saturn really is about fear. Saturn, being the ruler of Aquarius, is the fear of things that are not normal, whatever we call normal, you know. And I see that now, a lot of fear in the world of what we don't consider normal. Well, what is normal? Normal is always something, it's a state that changes constantly. There is no such thing as normal anymore.
That's true.
You know. So
I think you just recently took some time off, some downtime for astrology in the last year or two, didn't you? Did you?
Well, I tried.
All right.
I was doing a lot of work with Astrology Hub. I did a lot of classes for them last year.
The Astrology Hub. Okay, yes.
Yeah, and I did a lot of organizational lectures last year too. They're all at the website. A lot of the stuff is at the website to be downloaded. Lots apparently now on YouTube that I didn't even know about.
Star Cycles website?
Starcycles.com is my website.
Okay, and that's where people can get your 2024 cheat sheet, of course.
They can get the cheat sheet, they can get a weekly forecast, they can get a free newsletter, they can also get the link to register for January 20th, because it's under our
even a link there. That's easy.
Oh yeah, I always put that in the website, you know, for people, and that's where people can go if they want to know what I'm doing. But this year I'm actually trying to take time off for sure. I'm only doing about 3 workshops this year, because I'm putting together 50 years of archives, and it's a big project.
Well, Georgia, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me on behalf of the Florida Atlantic Chapter, the NCGR. And
thank you, Scott.
I look forward to attending the hybrid workshop in my astral body, in cyberspace, in other words, since I don't think I'll be there in person. And until next time. All right.
Until next time, it was really good seeing you again.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything you'd like to clarify before we say goodbye?
No, let's just hope we have an easy hybrid event that day. Let's just hope.
All right.
Okay.
Georgia.
Thank you.
So much.